I'm hopeful that moment gave folks some time just to reflect as we think about what's happened already this week, and then also the nature of the conversation that we're to have. We're grateful to be in a county that really values bringing in collective thought and conversations, and having these types of difficult conversations as well. So just a big thank you to the entire Henrico community who has shown up this evening. I also want to do some acknowledgments. We have our chair, Christy Kinsella, and our vice chair, Mrs. Alicia Atkins, in the room. Thank you all for being here this evening. I'd also love to acknowledge our fearless leader, Superintendent Amy Cashwell, who's in the room, along with my peers on our division leadership here in Henrico, who have all really prioritized this conversation. We have some amazing panelists in the room as well that I will share a bit about in a few. But there also are others who are just in the room who are not panelists, but members of HPD, our HCPS emergency manager, John Casello's here, and just several members within the Henrico family that have shown up for the conversation. A little bit of housekeeping. And so in order for us to flow and get as much conversation from panelists and Q&A towards the end, what we'll do, and you may even see in the chat, a few links that will be dropped. One is for you to sign in so that we can know who is here in the room. And then after that, if you have questions, comments, or even just thoughts that you want individuals to be aware of, we're going to ask that you fill out that link. The chat gets busy at times, so it will be hard for us to respond in that way. But if you could complete the link, any questions that you have, we will have some time for Q&A towards the end. All participants are muted at the time, but our panelists will be able to speak. And again, we are open to dialogue, positive dialogue, respectful, reflective dialogue to happen in the chat as well. And I see a few people are already dropping a few things there in the chat. All right. So I would love to jump in and just share who is going to be here on the panel with us this evening. I will start with Morgan Abbott, and she is with Respect Richmond. She joined the Office of the Attorney General in August of 2019 as the Senior Victim Advocate and Lethality Assessment Program Coordinator within the Programs and Outreach Division. With many accolades and various roles within the community, one of the most notable for this discussion is her role as the statewide ceasefire coordinator, where she works with communities across the Commonwealth to strategically combat and reduce violent crimes. Welcome, Morgan. We also have Lorraine Wright, who's a native New Yorker who's been contributing to Richmond and the surrounding communities since 1995, currently servicing the Violence Prevention Program. She's the manager there with the Richmond and Henrico Health District. She's also executive director of I Vote for Me, a community-based organization that focuses on self-advocacy and the protection of human rights. She is the proud mother of two amazing humans and believes in the power of community to create movements. Debbie Long is the Vice President of Programs for the Henrico County Council of PTAs, which engages and empowers families and communities to advocate for all children. And when not volunteering, she works as an independent public relations practitioner. And last but not least, we have Liz Parker, who really oversees a lot of our counseling efforts right here in HCPS. She's the only staff member on panel this evening, but she has such a holistic background and approach to the work that we're doing here in Henrico, and we're really excited to have her here on the panel as well. All right. So we are going to start with a video. And the videos feature some voices of our students, which is really why we are here. And so I'm going to ask the team to really cue up this video and share some perspectives from some of our own HCPS students.
School is the place where we come to learn.
It's also where we socialize and participate in sports and clubs.
It's a big part of our lives, so it should be a place where we feel safe.
But lately, that's been a challenge.
With all the shootings going on around the country,
and the weapons found in our schools.
Something needs to be done.
And when you say something, that can mean a lot of somethings.
like metal detectors, we've had them at sporting events for a while, but now they're being tested in schools, and I admit, it's a lot, but hopefully it'll make a difference.
Social media continues to be monitored, so even the hint of a threat is taken very seriously. And don't wait for an administrator to discover it. If you hear something or see someone posting anything shady or scary, let others know.
And if you do own a gun or have one in your home, leave it there and leave it locked up.
On a more personal note, if you know someone who's struggling, try to get them to talk to a counselor. You're not getting them in trouble, you're getting them help.
We may not always want to come here, but we do care about this place. It's important to us.
This is where I see my friends. It's where I play sports, and yes, it's where I learn.
School's a big part of my life, and someday I want to be able to look back with happy memories.
So let's work together and try to make this place safe.
So a big round of kudos to our Verona Center for Communications and Media Relations students who weren't just featured in the video, created the video, wrote the script, worked really closely with our communications division, and just saw it fit to do their own PSA about some of the things that they were seeing in schools. And if you're anything like me, it really centers you to hear from our youth. And so just really appreciative of them for lending their voice and their perspective. Lorraine, I'd like to jump into the panel and really start with you. And before I jump into questions, would love even a bit of a response. Any reflections from the video as you think about your work with the Richmond and Henrico Health District?
Hi, Adrienne. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Wow. So that video, I have to say, I do agree with the sentiment. Something needs to be done. From a health equity and public health perspective, we really need to look at how do we address trauma. What I know from my advocacy work with the Dignity in Schools campaign and just my life's work is that police officers and law enforcement in schools don't necessarily make them safer. And that's not me saying it. That's what the evidence has shown. And so I'm not necessarily going to speak on law enforcement in terms of this conversation because that's not my lane. My lane, though, is public health. And that has a direct correlation to public safety. So thank you again, everyone, for welcoming me to the conversation. So Adrienne, do you want me to now kind of go into, a little bit of a summary of what I'm doing?
Yeah, I will ask, because for some folks on the call, and I say VDH and Richmond, Henrico Health District, but everyone doesn't really know what that means. So can you talk a little bit about this collective agency and the kind of work that you all have done around health equity, and then how that's connected to some of the kind of violence prevention efforts that you are heavily involved in throughout the community?
Sure. And so to do that, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to share just a few short slides, just going to help everyone get a little bit more of a visual as to what I'm referencing. So just give me a moment here.
Absolutely.
So here it is. We're talking about the Trauma Healing Response Network. And Adrienne, what I think what you were referring to, we are a part of the Virginia Department of Health, but specifically the Richmond and Henrico Health Districts, right? And so health equity is absolutely a focus for us, and not only a focus, but probably the singular focus, because every single thing that we do around violence and violence prevention has to take on a health equity lens. And why do we say that that's a necessary perspective? Because we all understand the social determinants of health. We all understand the adverse childhood experiences. I know Liz will probably talk about that in her mental health space, but they are not mutually exclusive. And so we can't talk about one without talking about the other. And for me, when we talk about health equity, that's the baseline. That's the that's the jump off point, so to speak. So within the district, and this was actually prior to me joining the district, the city council actually approved for funding to go to creating what we call the Trauma Healing Response Network. And this is a network of probably about 38 to 40 40 grassroots organizations that really have come together to meet this need. And
And
again,
Lorraine,
so yes, ma'am,
quickly, can you make your slides larger
I can.
so
So
that we can see the full screen? Okay,
I'm going to do slideshow view. All right.
perfect. Okay, thank you.
Is that a little bit better?
Yes.
All right, great. And so, this again was stemming from gun violence prevention efforts, and very specifically, there were, incidents of gun violence in the Belt Atlantic area, in Midlothian, early last year, and that's really kind of what prompted this effort. We were saying, hey, like enough is enough. We really have to come together and figure out a very different perspective and a different way to look at how we approach these instances of gun violence. And again, what we understood is that everything we're talking about is based in trauma. And so we have to look at it from that perspective. But it says here, this work has been occurring and building for years via grassroots efforts prior to this framework being formed. And we wanted to make sure we were honoring the folks, the grassroots, community-based folks that were in these areas that we were wanting to target and wanting to look at. They were already there. And so we wanted to make sure that we were helping them to become more sustainable. So then when there is an instance of gun violence, or an instance of a traumatic event, we already know who we're helping to, we're getting in place, or we're helping to connect folks to. That's really important, because gun violence, or violence of any nature, really needs to be tackled from the prevention end. And so, like, there's no other way really for us to look at it. Here, 1,780 firearm visits, or emergency room visits in Henrico between 2016 and 2022. That's a lot. That's a lot. And we understand, because we're looking at the landscape, that that's not getting better. So what are we proposing to do? What are we saying that we're going to do? So we're taking a health equity lens, just like we said. But the background is homicides and historic redlining in these neighborhoods. We're talking about the lack of equity. Again, when we're talking about health equity, lack of equity all the way around, economic equity, access to healthcare, all of these factors really contribute to the desperation that we see in these areas, which are absolutely contributing to gun violence. So we can't miss that. And then we talked about the need for mental wellness and trauma healing. And this is a heat map that's overlapping those areas that we've all identified, that really have a need for this reinforcement in that mental health space. So I'm going to stop sharing now, because I just really want to help everyone understand that this is a collective effort. It has to be an integrated approach. There is no one way for us to tackle what it is we're talking about here. And I think what we're all committed to doing just that. And we have to do it in our own way. So what's going to feel good and what's going to come natural to me may not come as natural or feel as good to someone else, but we need to make sure that we're tag teaming this. We need to make sure parents are on deck. We need to make sure also, from the school perspective, we're not creating additional at-risk environments with suspensions and expulsions. We need to make sure we're changing the culture in the school environment to make sure kids are feeling heard, that they're not suspended for relatively minor infractions, that we're putting things in place to make sure that they understand how to resolve conflict. So when we are suspending folks and they're out in the streets now having the same conflict that's not remediated, they have no additional skills to be able to resolve that conflict, and they're coming back to school with the same conflict. What are we doing? We haven't changed the environment. We haven't changed the culture.
Lorraine, your passion just reigns through, and it's evident, as I think I shared in your bio, that this is really your life's work. Thank you for starting us off in some of the numbers. And it was, for me, and just seeing it today, right? How eye-opening the connections of Richmond and Henrico. And of course, we know this is national, right? We're seeing national numbers spike and things of the sort. But thank you for centering our conversation with that. I'm curious, and really thinking about Henrico specifically, Are you noticing any specific trends or things within our Henrico community and with our Henrico youth? Um, and then just from your perspective with those things, and I think you shared a bit, but how can we address them again in a very comprehensive, collective, and holistic way?
So what I've seen is in our kids, and this is Henrico and Richmond, but our kids have an inability to figure out their space in conflict, how to use their voice in a way where they're heard, they feel heard, but also that they're not creating more harm. And they don't understand that concept, and we might not be introducing it to them in the spaces that we could. And so let's take advantage of opportunities when there is conflict to bring folks in. Something that we're looking at doing in the health district when there is an incident, not necessarily even of gun violence, because again, we're trying to prevent that. That's more reactive, and we're not first responders. So we want to make sure that we're making that clear as well. But when there is an incident of conflict, when there could be a physical or even a verbal altercation, call us. Call us, because we have partners who are here on the ground that's already doing the work in some Henrico schools and some Richmond schools, but also just in these communities and neighborhoods. So we can absolutely come in and flank the existing staff in HCPS just to help figure out how to diffuse the conflict, how to help them find their voice, how to help them really understand what the basis for the conflict was in the first place. I talked to a student that said she was she got jumped, actually, and this was in Highland Springs. She got jumped, and she said, Miss Lorraine, the girl was somebody that I was best friends with in elementary school. Then COVID hit and they were kind of estranged, but she didn't even understand why.
Right, with the conflict, yeah.
We
Yeah.
as adults, we as adults who have this training, who understand what this looks like or what it should look like and what it is they're talking about, but they can't even name. That's where we need to interject, and we need to help them name it, and we need to help them build this bridge and understand that they really don't have any conflict. They really do like each other. I don't know what this was, but we can help you
But
figure it out.
yeah, wow. I've just appreciate that perspective. And I think I saw some head nodding and agreements about handling conflict and how we resolve things. And I'm thinking about, I want to draw Debbie into the conversation a bit, but no, you're still on the panel, Lorraine. So we're all talking and discussing. Um, but you know, when we talked prior, you said a statement that stood out with me, and it said, weapons are not being received at schools, they are coming into schools. And we were just talking about, like, how do we stop that happening? And Debbie, I want to bring you into the conversation as one of our amazing leaders with the HCC PTA, and really having a great pulse on parent voice throughout Henrico County, just by nature of who you are and the volunteer and service work that you do. But really like to bring you in your role and just thinking through a few things, knowing the challenges that our parent groups are combating, and also knowing some of the strengths and areas where we're seeing traction to ensure safe communities for our youth. From a parent perspective, does any of what Lorraine has said resonate from you, and or just what are perspectives that you're hearing from our parents, our guardians, and our families in Henrico County?
Well, thank you for having me and bringing a parent perspective to this. In general, I would say that PTAs are hearing a lot more from parents about concerns about incidents at school and, safety at school, not in the safety procedures, but rather that there are just more incidents that seem to be occurring. And Lorraine kind of spoke to that. It seems as though there may be. People are coming out of COVID with some trauma, but I want to go back much, much further, because when you look at suicide rates for kids, it starts around 2013 and it skyrockets. We have a problem that is going on that is much, much greater than just violence against other kids. And so we are hearing a lot, kind of at the school buses about, what is happening in the schools now and how can parents get involved, because as you've just stated, the guns aren't being handed out at school. They're being brought into the school. And so what can we do as parents to partner with our schools to make that a safer place for everybody?
Yeah. Wow, great points. And that's a real gut check, right? Pre-COVID. what the numbers already were, and just seeing them more layered now with the issues and concerns that we're dealing with. So gun violence, gun storage. I want to hear about Be SMART. And I know that on a national level, some PTAs have adopted Be SMART. Just share what Be SMART is before I start talking about that. If you can share with the group what Be SMART is and what it's all about.
Absolutely. So Be SMART is a separate 501c3 from PTA that PTA has endorsed, along with other resources that parents can use to have discussions about guns with each other and how to store it. So SMART isn't an acronym. It stands for, the S is secure your weapons in homes and households and in your cars. The American Association of Pediatrics estimates that there are 4.6 million children that live in a house with a loaded, unlocked gun.
Wow.
That's a lot of access. And so the first thing we can do as responsible parents is just to secure the weapon. And then the M is for modeling. We've talked about the number of unintentional hospital visits, that we've had, but between 2015 and 2020, there were more than 2,000 unintentional shootings where children shot themselves or others. And so modeling the safe behavior, the program will go through and explain that. And then, asking and helping parents have those conversations, those awkward conversations about, my child's playing at your house. Do you happen to have an unlocked weapon in your house? How do you have that conversation? I've been doing it since preschool and kindergarten, but now that I have a middle schooler and they arrange their own play dates, it's a little bit harder. And so having resources for parents to discuss the need to have that conversation, but then to put it into context of statistics. 91% of the time, if a child shoots somebody, it's another child. And then, recognizing the role of guns in suicide. I mentioned the rates are going up. If a child has access to a gun in the household, or if there is a gun in the household, they're 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. If they use a gun in that attempt, they are going to be successful more than 90% of the time. So the guns are a major issue, not just in our schools and about school safety, but for your child and their safety. And so recognizing the role, and then the T is about talking to your peers, bringing this information out to the community so that everybody knows. There have been at least 6 deaths, 12 injuries of gunfire on school grounds in Virginia in the past 2 years. That is more than the previous years combined. I mean, we're on such a increased percentage-wise. I think it's 57% more than since 2021. So we need to flatten that curve. Yeah. And so having information about how to store a gun is just an educational program that makes it smart and easy for parents. It's something that other PTAs are bringing into the school. And I've seen that Allison, who can speak to this much better, is on the call.
I think you've muted, Debbie.
How did I mute?
Okay.
How long have I been muted? Come on here, guys.
Just not long. As soon as you said Allison. Yes. As soon as you said
when
Allison.
I went to put her name in the chat. So Allison is the co-leader of Be SMART. And so if you would like to have this program coming into your school, speak with your principal, get in touch with her directly. She has all of the statistics and stuff, and a way to have a true longer program for parents in your school community.
Okay. Allison, are you going to be able to stay with us for the entire hour? Will you be on? Okay. Stay close by in case we may want to hear more about that. And Debbie, thank you for sharing that Be SMART is a separate 501c3, because as I understand it, there's some PTAs or PTOs that have adopted it and are doing workshops, others aren't, but I think it's a great opportunity to hear from a parent family perspective about advantages of showing that. So Allison, I'm kind of making a note for you. I want to get through some of our panelists, but I may come back to you in Q&A if you don't mind. Okay. Last question for you, Debbie. One of the really big parts, and it's obvious that you have an advocacy background. Really appreciate the numbers that you share here this evening. But when it comes to advocacy, what are some of the focuses, just from a systemic, I know we just wrapped up General Assembly not too long ago. What are some of the things that parents, families, PTAs, just folks are advocating for as it relates to the topics of this evening?
Yeah, so the PTA is first and foremost an advocacy committee. We know it for all of the fun things that we bring to school campuses, but we were actually formed to be a child advocate. We were behind the lunch programs and the juvenile justice system and a whole bunch of things. When we talk about safety from a PTA perspective, we talk about digital safety, vaping, drug awareness, opioid problems, all of that. We want to have conversations in the same way that we're having conversations about gun violence. And so Virginia PTA and National PTA ask for a lot of funding from our government to do evidence-based community violence research, to learn more about the interconnection between all of these different issues. How learning losses make somebody feel frustrated at school, how that frustration lends itself to a mental health crisis, how that lends itself to gun violence, like how all of these things can be related. And so we talk about how to get parents involved in the school safety plans, how they can get engaged in finding resources through their school or community to find their child help when the family feels it's necessary. Talking about emotional safety and stuff. We look for the funding on that gun violence prevention, and we encourage safe storage education. Every parent has the responsibility to decide what is best for their family as far as how to protect them, but then they also have the responsibility, if they own a gun, to make sure that everybody else is safe around it.
Okay.
So it's not an anti-gun position. They don't have any actual positions on a lot of the gun legislation, but rather funding for it and really engaging parents and educating parents so that they can advocate, so they can make their own decisions as to how to move forward.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing, Debbie. And as I shared with Lorraine, open dialogue and conversation. We're at 6:30, and I just want to remind folks, if you have questions, comments, or thoughts, I hear the chat box going off, so feel free to leave a few questions there. We're hopeful to get to questions by 6:45. And so just again, please leave your notes there. And thank you for folks who are dropping some really helpful links in the chat as well. And so, Debbie, one of the last things you talked about were just resources, right? So resources for young people, resources for families. And so, Liz, would love to bring you into the conversation just from where you sit in schools, but also being one of our staff members who are most closely connected to some of our partners when it comes to this work. Talk about some of the resources, people resources, ways that we're being, innovative in our approach in response to some of the things that we're seeing in schools.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me this evening. It is really exciting to be a part of this panel, and I'm excited to continue to have these conversations. This is not a singular experience. I think these are conversations we need to continue having with our communities, with our students, with each other, because it's an evolving situation. So I'd love to share some of the things that we're doing here in Henrico County Public Schools. We know Henrico, like many, many school divisions across the U.S., are really working to discern how to best address growing concerns over student mental health. We know that there are recent nationwide surveys that are showing increases in mental health symptoms, including anxiety, depressive symptoms, suicidal ideation. And we also recognize that schools are natural settings to support student mental health. We know that of students that receive mental health services, about 70 to 80% of them receive those services at school. So it is really important that we are looking at our school mental health model and ensuring that we are able to be preventative, but then also identify early identification as well as early intervention, and then also be able to provide and link students to some additional more intensive supports. So when I kind of talk about our school mental health model here in Henrico County Public Schools, that's really what it is. It's varying levels of support to really help match students' social, emotional, and mental health needs as they shift over time, because they do, with the services, the evidence-based interventions, and the providers that can assist them. And so we do this through kind of an existing framework that we have, in which we know that all students receive some very specific universal mental health promotion for the prevention. And this is delivered by, it's shared leadership amongst school and community stakeholders. So, teachers have a part, counselors have a part, community leaders have a part, PTA has a part. And when we talk about the kind of that universal prevention, we're really talking about culturally responsive trauma-informed practices. We're talking about restorative practices, community circles. We're also talking about universal social emotional learning and integrating that for students and for staff. And, mental health literacy and wellness curriculum. We're talking about our signs of suicide evidence-based curriculum that we implement at all middle and high schools. It's really that substance use prevention programming. It's all of that kind of universal work that we provide to every student just by being enrolled in an HCPS school. And then as we go up in that tier, we are able to identify very early and intervene with some selected supports for students who need a little bit more intensive layers of supports, who perhaps that universal support is not really meeting or addressing their needs. And so this is when we're able to tailor our school mental health services for students who have been identified as needing that additional support. This can include brief individual counseling, small group counseling services. We do some responsive circles, restorative conversations. I really appreciated Lorraine's focus on trauma, as well as on conflict resolution, and then repairing harm, which is really a lot of the work that we do through our listening circles and restorative conversations. It's part of our safety planning, our suicide risk planning, and then linking with systems of care. And then, as we know, we have students who are going to require even more intensive layers of support. And so that is when we, as school mental health providers, really link with our community mental health providers to ensure that students are connected and receiving those intensive supports that they need, but also so that we are able to speak the same language and work with students and really support, kind of wrap those supports around students inside of school as well. So really just looking at a comprehensive school mental health model that includes all of the bits and pieces that we're talking about. And really the focus of our mental health model is because it's focused because we know that a key protective factor in addressing student mental health and addressing suicide amongst youth is school connectedness, right? Building that sense of belonging, that sense of being cared for and being affirmed, that positive school climate is so incredibly important. And then we also know that it's proven to be one of the most effective school safety strategies is positive, safe, and affirming educational environments. And so that is why it is so incredibly necessary for us to address that universally through the social emotional learning programs, trauma-informed practices, restorative practices, and just that mental health literacy and education for everyone, in addition to making sure we can provide services for students who need those additional intensive interventions and layers. And so that's kind of just an overview of the services. We have school counselors, school psychologists, and school social workers. HCPS has really significantly expanded the number of those staff. We hired over the past 2 years 45 additional counselors, another 22 additional social workers and school psychologists. So we are continuing to work to build our staff and our people resources, as well as the capacity with our existing staff to meet just the growing and evolving needs of our students and staff.
Yeah. And even, I mean, Liz, the extensive work outside of school staff in some of these creative models, when I look at even the work that Lorraine has done and how we're working with other entities. And so I know it's hard to say in a few minutes all that's happening, but I think it's important that people understand the different tiers of support that are happening in schools. You talked about belonging, culture, and just how people feel when they walk into a space and how they respond. But I want to connect that to how important the anonymous alerts have been in schools. And when I think about your team, you all are often front and center, even with some of the threat assessments that happen too. And so if we can get into some of the details about, one, what are anonymous alerts? How do they work? Has it been helpful even as we've identified areas when we have to go in and, address the situation in schools? And then even from your perspective around some of the threat assessments, just what that process is. I know oftentimes as we're talking to parents, when you get the email or the notice, you don't know what to do, right? You get nervous, you get excited, you want to go to the school. But just share a little bit about either of those two things for folks who are in the audience.
Sure, absolutely. So I so appreciate, Adrienne, when you talked about our partnerships. We are so fortunate in Henrico County to have such wonderful partnerships with Virginia Department of Health and with all of Henrico area mental health and developmental services and just all of the community agencies that we have. And so we're so fortunate and appreciative of those partnerships. So we have a couple things. We have anonymous alerts, which I always want to promote. And anonymous alerts is truly anonymous. And I definitely want to get that across because that's something I think that people can be fearful of, but anonymous alerts is anonymous. And anonymous alerts really allows our students, our families, or really any community member to report threats against schools, drug or alcohol use, just strange or behavior that might seem uncharacteristic, bullying, cyberbullying, depression, helping your friends, any of those types of things are the things that we would really love to see continuing coming through anonymous alerts. Schools do receive those notifications and then begin to investigate them very, very quickly. And so we really do get a lot of great information from anonymous alerts that also allows us to identify students that may be struggling that we can then kind of pour our interventions on. So anonymous alerts is very, very simple. It is very easy. You can use your smartphone, your tablet, go online, and truly there is an anonymous alerts app. The activation code is just Henrico. And so I'm happy to link in the flyer, but that is definitely something that's very helpful in connecting the community and our partnerships and schools to be able to partner to identify situations, but also to respond. And then I'd also really love to talk about Handle with Care, because when we talk about trauma, I think this is a really excellent piece and addition to our support services and our partnerships that we've done this year. So Handle with Care, Virginia, is really a partnership between the schools, between Henrico Mental Health, between Henrico Police Department, as well as first responders, so EMT and fire. And anytime at all that police, EMT, or fire department responds to a call that in any way connects or includes or they come in contact with an HCPS student, they are identifying that, and we get a Handle with Care alert. And all the information that is shared is the student's name, the school that they attend, and Handle with Care. And then that allows us to immediately connect with the school directly, and then the school, without addressing the incident at all, is able to really, from that trauma-informed lens, kind of connect and check in with the student, but also just look for behavior signs that a student may be struggling or just to help if it really assists us. Let's say a student didn't complete homework one night. Having that handled with care is really, really helpful for our staff and teachers to know, and the way that we are responding with that trauma-informed lens, because our goal is to really mitigate any impact of trauma on our students as well. And so Handle with Care has been wonderful. It's really allowed us to identify students that just maybe need a check-in, but then also identify students who potentially need more support and more services, and then connect them with those services. So that's something else that we've been using this year. That's been great.
Thank you so much, Liz. And I know we could talk more about it. I want to segue to Morgan, but I also want folks to know that I'm starting to get questions. So I'm looking at questions too. So we're going to start to integrate some of that. Again, if you have thoughts, please put them in the link, because this is what we'll share with division leadership and our board, just so people can kind of see and understand what some of the comments and thoughts are. So Morgan, I want to segue to you, but in an interesting way that I don't think we really talked about. So I know with Respect Richmond, you shared that you're also connected with Crime Stoppers. And so even when I think about anonymous alerts and Crime Stoppers, essentially the same thing, where community is stepping in to share what they've seen, what they've heard, to help us identify things faster. If you can share a little bit about, I guess, that background, that experience, and then we'll kind of jump into what Respect Richmond is all about. I was really excited to hear about this offering for the Richmond region.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So Respect Richmond, I mean, it started from the Project Safe Neighborhoods grant, is how it did, and its job is to, of course, reduce gun and gang violence through outreach, training, education. One of the things that they did or have started a while when they first started, and it was very successful, was pushing out, that social media content and kind of awareness through what we all know the youth and students are utilizing through all different platforms, through Facebook, Instagram, the YouTube. When they were looking at videos, it's an ad that we could run to just kind of let them know that, hey, we see what's happening and we're here, showing that awareness and that outreach. And from my position is we kind of look at this too as a statewide issue, with the Office of the Attorney General and the backing of Jason Miyares. He is really, one of the foundations is to really reduce violence, group violence, gang violence, gun violence across the Commonwealth. And so with that, along partnering with the Governor Youngkin, really making this a priority for this administration through this, have been, again, in this region, supported the Metro Richmond Crime Stoppers, which is similar to Healing Hands. We aren't directly contacting the schools to get really that threat assessment piece there. But once an anonymous tip does come in, it is diverted to whichever locality it pertains to. And again, it's done through an app or through a phone. We link with lots of different media outlets to let them know that. And the Respect Richmond, all of the ads go directly to that as well, just to give that anonymous outreach and that platform to notify the proper authorities of what's happening, specifically. And Henrico is a huge player for that, and they are very involved in the schools as well.
Okay. And Morgan, one thing that I've appreciated about learning about Project Safe Neighborhoods is really this, what we're talking about now, shared ownership, collective work, and kind of understanding where our opportunities are. Could you talk about any specific work that's happening in Henrico when you're thinking about Project Safe Neighborhood? And I believe there was also a Virginia Rules program that comes out of Respect Richmond. What's happening in Henrico with in connection to those opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are working with Henrico. We've been assisting law enforcement through this as well, providing some with Henrico County Police Department with some equipment, funding for that. One of our things that we like to do is, we can assist with getting, that federal funding through us into these areas that need it. And what we do is through strategic planning and strategic meetings, figuring out what organizations already exist, and then figuring out where those gaps are and how we can help facilitate filling those gaps and those needs. But listening to the community, not coming in to say, hey, what do you got? We think this is what you need, but really listening to the community. What do you all need? Has been really, helpful and successful in this area. One of those needs was Virginia Rules, which is an education specific curriculum that is brought into schools where SROs can sign up and bring it. We also have offer camp. It's for each curriculum is different. We have one for elementary, middle, and high school, along with additional resources for parents. And there are guides that they can take home. We have a website where lots of parents can get any kind of resources they want. It also educates on the Virginia laws, so they understand and students understand at their learning level what these laws are in Virginia, and how to kind of understand and how to create those conversations at home regarding the laws, regarding gun safety, what to do if your approach at a bus stop. And understanding gang activity and how that can be infiltrated through these young people that we're seeing. So, through Virginia Rules, again, they have a summer camp that is built to, as for any rising 6th through 9th graders, is the kind of the ideal age group. But it's a fun time for them to interact with law enforcement and to build that bond and give them something to do. It's free for them. So that is also another great perk, but that's a little bit about Virginia Rules.
Okay. And you all, we're segueing into Q&A. You actually answered one of the most recent questions that we got, and things are rolling in now. So I want to jump there. Morgan, thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely.
And so the question is, Morgan's already answered it, but thinking in terms of the programs that each of you are involved in, how have they been measured for effectiveness with regards to violence prevention? Just which initiatives have seen the best results, just from your perspective in the work that you're doing? And so that could be for Lorraine, Liz, or even Debbie, with the work that you all have been involved in. What initiatives have seen the best results?
So we have a Here to Listen hotline that's specifically for trauma and or instances of gun violence. And I'm going to share it in the chat. But that hotline basically is for anyone who has a concern in any of those spaces. And while folks sometimes don't even know what they need, that hotline can sort of determine and assess and then try to, I think, and you use the word, Adrian, triage, right? And so that right there is really what we need to do, figure out what's the best route for this particular case and make sure it's an individualized approach. So our hotline has been effective, even though it's not as well known. Now, something that you all don't know is that the Trauma Healing Response Network has only been, around since effectively since October of last year. The launch was September 29th, and we're really just trying to get these coalition members together. Now, again, although they've already been doing existing work, which is exactly why we selected these particular partners, we saw their effectiveness in the community. And sometimes it's the community and grassroots organizations that might not get the funding, but they're doing the work day in and day out. And we wanted to make sure not only did we recognize those partners, but we made that connection to the cultural relevance, because that's also sometimes the barrier that we have. In Black and Brown communities, sometimes mental health is stigmatized, right? And so that's not the easiest conversation to have sometimes. But if you have a therapeutic but non-clinical approach, we can still meet the need, maybe in a non-traditional way. So I'm going to share that hotline number. But again, we have mental health resources. We also have grief and loss groups. We have healing circles. I'm an emotional emancipation circle facilitator. I'm also a facilitator of restorative and transformative justice circles. So I understand that the healing framework and what that should look like. And we're here to support our communities in whatever way we can. And sometimes, again, they don't know what that looks like, so we have to help steer them.
awesome. And I think what you shared, I think I heard Liz share, there was a lot about restorative circles, trauma-informed work. And so I can imagine that there's some parallel around initiatives that have worked. Want to move us down the road with some more questions. And I'm hopeful that John is still in the room. He's our emergency manager, really is frontline with some of our crisis. But I'll just put this question out here. And John, if you're there, I will see if you can hop in here to help with this one. The question is, oh, there he is. Can we have more PD and training related to threat assessment in conjunction with our SROs? Example, book center discussions and things of the sort. So I think it may just be a great opportunity to talk about what we are currently doing and how we do work with training for our SROs in our schools.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's really exciting to see the passion that everybody has for school safety. As we know, we just see it in recent events. We're in scary times for sure. One of the things I'll talk a little bit about without getting too detailed, because we obviously have to protect the process for its fidelity. All of our schools have threat assessment teams, and they also have threat assessment leaders. And all of those threat assessment teams and the leaders are provided training annually and throughout the year. We also work with HPD and our school services unit, our SROs. We provide training with them as well on what a threat assessment looks like or what a threat looks like in the school, as opposed to what a threat looks like in the community and with law enforcement, and how that is mitigated and investigated. One of the things that we really concentrate on in our world is putting supports and interventions in place, right? The goal is when, you have a young student making a comment that is concerning in first, second, and third grade, what are we doing to help that student understand the ramifications of continuing to use that language? One of the things that was talked about earlier was this conflict resolution. And unfortunately, the trend that we see is the language that our students are using. And early on in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, using aggressive, threatening language when they're in a conflict, and really trying to address that through our threat assessment process. And I know Liz talked a little bit about this as well, and putting interventions and supports in place for our students to understand that there's a better choice or there's another path to go down, and doing it early. One thing that we learned way before Newport News is that, threats come in all sizes. We really need to be conscious of that and putting the interventions and supports in early. And the other piece that's really important is our victims as well, our potential victims, and really supporting them through the process. And we talk a lot about, even when we find a threat that may not be something that we feel is viable, it was just a poor choice or poor decision that a student made, we still have to look at the impact it has on that victim and how they perceive it, and putting supports and interventions in place for them as well.
I'd like, sorry, Adrienne, I'd like just to jump into here. I just want everyone, I've worked for a number of school divisions, and I would love to share with everyone how very, very seriously every single threat is taken in HCPS. I've just been really, really pleased with that piece, not for looking for a punitive result, but really wanting to thoroughly investigate, ensure, one, that there is not a threat, and if there is a threat, that we're neutralizing the threat in a safe way for all involved, but then also to provide and link with any additional supports, community resources, and mental health support. So we are very fortunate to have such a team, and we do work hand in hand often with Henrico Police Department, but again, also with the crisis intervention team and the supports that they can provide, also with the Department of Social Services, also with CPS, and we kind of all work together in the systems of care to address these things from multiple perspectives. And I think that that's a really important piece to share as well.
Yeah, and I second that, Liz. One of the things that I'm really excited about that we have in Henrico is our partnerships. And when I talk to other school division across the state, not all of them have that same layer of partnerships that we have here in Henrico. It truly does take a team, and everyone is vested in this. And Liz is 100% correct that we 100% of the time, if there is a threat that happens in our school, it is investigated. There are different layers and avenues that goes down depending on the threat that is made or where the supports need to come from. But all threats are investigated in Henrico County, and I'm very proud of that.
Awesome. I'm going to try to get through two more, and we kind of just mentioned something that you shared, Liz, and John, stay close by. So the question is, has there been a recent uptick in threats of violence throughout the county, or are schools just communicating them better? And then the follow-up question is, are there specialized counselors who specifically work with students who may make violent threats? Any insights there?
I'll touch on the first one. I think it's important to realize that, when we have incidents that happen in the news and it becomes to the forefront of everybody's mind, we do tend to get a little bit of an uptick in it. And I think it's twofold. Some of it is that some of our students may be hearing things out there, and it's kind of, they repeat some of the things that they hear. It's also that it heightens our awareness as a staff that we need to really be looking at things and paying attention to what's happening. And so it's multi-layered and it's a variety of reasons why it does happen. But we definitely, and I will say as I said before, I see that there's an uptick in the language that our students are using, right? And when they're in conflict, a lot of the threatening language that they're using, and that's where it comes. Our responsibility is to educate them, put our interventions and supports in place to understand that you have to use different language. You have to resolve things a different way. And you can't say things. And we talk a lot about, a student in kindergarten making a threatening statement, and why in the past we may have just said, oh, that's just a kindergarten, we'll let that go, where we realize that, no, we can't do that. It starts right now. It's like, this is the foundation. With education, it's the foundation with safety as well. So we need to address that early, because that same comment that a student makes in kindergarten, who now makes that comment in middle school, takes on a whole nother layer and ramifications. So it's important to address it early.
And John, I'm happy to also jump in and address kind of that. I think it's an excellent question about mental health providers or professionals or counselors that are uniquely trained to address students, certain students. So it's a great question, because we have our school mental health providers who are trained to provide mental health services in schools, but then we also understand our scope of practice and our capacity as well. And so that's when those partnerships with our outside agencies are so critical. And so if at any time a scenario or situation looks as though we need some additional, more intensive layers of support, that is when we can seek and link students with that. And I think this is a great, so all of our schools actually have a Henrico mental health liaison that is connected to the school, to the administrator, to the school-based mental health team, and they consult often as appropriate. And so that's an immediate link. But I also would love to highlight, we this year, for the first time, put in and received some grant funding in partnership with Henrico Mental Health that allowed us to provide a full-time licensed mental health clinician on site at one of our schools, on site at campus. And it also allowed us to provide a family support partner. And I think that speaks a lot to what Lorraine was talking about. This is an individual who has also had a family member or a child with a mental illness, who've struggled with mental health, and can help walk families and help them navigate that system and support them and kind of reduce some of that stigma and really walk alongside families throughout this journey. And so when we talk about that health disparities, and this has been something for us that has been very successful and a very successful partnership. It has really helped us to eliminate some of those barriers to access for mental health supports, for those really intensive layers of support. And we have been really excited about the data that we have been collecting to show the success of this program. We are looking for every way possible to expand this model and expand this programming. We have submitted a number of grants SAMHSA grants and other things that would allow us to do so. And we are really looking to explore how we can expand this model that we've now developed to other school sites as well. So it's that partnership between school mental health providers and community mental health providers. And with this partnership, it's specific with our community service board, which is Henrico Area Mental Health. Having that on-site clinician has been wonderful. Having that family support partner to help families access and feel comfortable with receiving that support has also been wonderful.
So I'm going to bring in the advocacy piece here. So we have some successful things, and I see a lot of questions in the chat as to what is most successful. That's where PTA is looking at funding research so that we can actually document and get the data as to what is most successful. We are looking for funds to bring more people into the schools, more community partners into the schools, because our schools don't have the capacity to be mental health support for every single student. They can do the SEL learning and they can help students learn how to deal with things and where to seek help, but bringing in extra support. One of the things Virginia PTA has been working with Representative Spanberger on is bringing in telemental health. So that you can have students not have to leave school or lose any educational time in getting supports that they need. It's important to point out that these are all legislative initiatives to seek funding. Those are things where parents do have the capacity to get involved and make their voices heard. So Henrico is being held out as an example, since we do have a telemental health program that was funded through HEF, the Henrico Educational Foundation. And so we are ahead of the game in Henrico on some of this stuff, but we are looking to expand this model across Virginia and get more national and state funding.
And thank you so much, Deb. Thank you so much for that. So yes, we definitely want those partnerships. We also want to make sure that we have the structures in place as a school system to provide the professional learning that is necessary for all school staff to then receive students back into the classroom. So schools are a little different from community-based clinical sites, right? Because you have a student, and so they are going to receive therapy, and then they return to Algebra 1, or then they're released back into a hallway with 300 students, loud noises, and bells. And so I love these conversations and these partnerships for how we can expand, bringing in some additional mental health services into schools in a way that makes the most sense in the learning context, and in a way that is the safest and most supportive for students as well. That's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much to the entire Henrico family. I know we're at 7:05. I'm looking down at questions. We did touch on some things that I didn't raise up here, but more questions about mental health supports, PD as well. A really interesting comment about just code of conduct and how we're including parents and families and code of conduct as well. And so thank you for those who have just been present this evening, whether you were an active listener, whether you were active in the chat, whether you submitted a question, to our panelists who gave so much insight and shared so many resources with us. One of our follow-up items are going to be to provide some updates. So we'll likely have a bit of an FAQ to make sure we can try to get to as many questions as we can. And so be on the lookout for that in the upcoming days. But just can't say thank you all enough for your heart, for your presence, for your commitment to making sure we have safe, fun learning environments for our young people and in our communities too. And this is a continuation. I wouldn't say the start. We had similar conversations last year, and it's not the end either. And so I think what this shows us is that we need to continue the conversation, make sure that we're staying collective in our efforts and just sharing what it looks like to create those outcomes. It's 7:07. So I'm going to wrap up the conversation again with the thanks and just stay posted for any FAQ. And I again want to say, if you have a comment in the chat, please feel free to drop it in the link to make sure that we're able to see it and digest it and apply what we can. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening.